Welcome to another episode of the Industrial Strength Podcast, a podcast more focused on industrial fire departments and industrial hazmat responses. Once again, my name is Jeff. I'm a hazmat technician with 20 years of fire department service, with 10 being in the industrial side. Once again, with me are my co-hosts, Randy and Steve.
I'm Steve. I've got 10 years plus of experience in industrial manufacturing and 3 years on the industrial emergency response teams.
And my name's Randy. I'm a hazmat specialist. I have 17 years on our industrial fire department, mainly doing hazmat.
So today we're doing an audible. Instead of what we were originally planning on doing, since we had a nice, interesting topic last week, we're going to continue on our topic of rail cars. Toot toot.
Right, yeah.
I think I can.
Yeah. We talked about last week that the rail disasters we referenced were interesting enough where we wanted to do a whole episode on it. And so I think that's what we're doing today. So we're going to talk about those disasters a little more in depth.
I certainly hope that's what we're going to be doing today.
Well, that's our plan.
Right.
So we're going to dive a little more in depth on an incident that happened, well, what was that, about 2 years ago now?
So actually, it's going to be a pretty much two incidents that we're going to kind of dive into.
Yeah. Yeah, I think both actually have pretty good application back to like industrial hazmat and ways of thinking about if you work in a facility, steps you can take like to prep your team for railcar incidents as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, the two incidents that we're going to be talking about today, it's that, and I'm probably slaughtering the names, but I did use Google to try to pronounce this. Looks like it's Lac-Mégantic. It's in Canada. It's Quebec. It's right near the U.S. border, and it's going to be the East Palestine derailment.
Okay. All right. So why don't you tell me a little more about that Lac? How'd you say that? Lac what?
Megatic?
Megatic, okay. I would say Megantic, but once again, I don't speak French, man. That is a hardcore French thing. I'm sure I'm slaughtering it. So why don't you remind people what that disaster was, Jeff?
So that happened in 2013. I don't have the exact specifics, but it was a train derailment, and I think it was 28 cars maybe, and that was a huge hazardous spill that I still think there's right,
that was like all crude oil, right? So that was I think what they were doing is they were coming from a crude oil pumping operation, and they had a bunch of rail cars filled with crude, and the rail cars wound up derailing, catching fire, and basically destroying the entire downtown of, the name I'm going to slaughter again, Lac-Mégantic, whatever. That's how I'm going to pronounce it, man. Send me an email if you want. But yeah, it was like a humongous crude oil disaster.
Yeah, that town was pretty much destroyed.
Yeah, I think it was like there was some crazy number of I think of all the downtown buildings, there was like 40 or 50 downtown buildings. Only 3 of them survived.
Yeah,
it was ridiculous. So because part of them, some of them caught on fire, some of them were just so contaminated they had to be brought down. So there's only 3 that survived that disaster back in 2013.
Yeah, I believe it claimed 40 some, almost 50 lives.
Yeah.
I think 47 to be exact.
Yeah.
So almost 50. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. You're welcome. Almost. Approximate.
And with that incident, it was traced back to several factors, including, I believe, improper braking, and inadequate maintenance.
Yeah.
And then also, we talked about this last week, about the use of those outdated DOT 111 cars.
Yeah,
they
right.
were definitely ill-suited for transporting volatile materials. So
right, and at that same time frame, I think the U.S. had pretty much phased out using the DOT 111s because they had cited them as a safety concern.
Yep.
So, but I think what happened was this company found a couple loopholes and were exploiting them, if what I read is to be correct. And it's unfortunate. I'm not naming names on the company, but a lot of companies do such things, right? They find loopholes or they defer maintenance, and it leads to really negative outcomes sometimes.
Yep.
Cost savings. It's a big factor.
Yeah. Right. Budgets play a role in everything, right? I mean, we're no stranger to that. It happens at our facility all the time, right? You defer maintenance, push it back, or production schedule says this, and you can't get to things. Well, we're not gonna touch it because, or we don't have the budget to do it because, or whatever the directive is. It
we can put it off until next year.
Right. Yeah.
Or 5 years.
One more year. Right.
Yeah.
So, but that was a lot of the miscues going on in this derailment. So, like, I think one of the things that was a deferred maintenance was, I think, really what happened, like, I think the crux of this thing is the train cars wound up going under their own power, right? So what happened was the train was idled for the night. It lost its braking capability, and all these rail cars just started going downhill. It was a 1.2% downgrade slope, and man, it just started sliding down the track. So it's because there was some deferred maintenance on the lead engine, and it had a failed piston, and it started throwing oil, and it caught that oil that got thrown, got caught up in the turbocharger, caught fire. And, yep. And then the fire department got called in correctly. But one of the downsides is the fire department, their procedure was the first thing they do in any sort of railcar fire is they de-energize the engine, right? They shut it off to stop supplying the engine with fuel. So good move on their part, but I don't know how many people know this. When you're working with a rail car, if it's left overnight sitting, one engine is left on to provide compressed air, which provides braking power for the cars all connected to it. And so when you shut off that engine, if the pressure is lost gradually, which I don't know any system that's perfect, it all gets lost gradually, the brakes have a chance to fail instead of having the safety mechanism catch. And that's what happened in this instance. Is the fact that once the fire department idled that engine, it shut off the air compressor, and then eventually that air bled down in the air brakes, and they failed. And
Yep.
The other super negative thing about this was that the engineer who idled the train for the night did set handbrakes on some cars, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough handbrakes to hold the load. So,
nope. But
that's another real applicable point too: is how many people working with rail cars know how to actuate and deactivate that handbrake on a rail car, right? So, and that's a critical skill. Those are one of those things where I think we're fortunate as a team that we actually took a class, or had a class taught to us where we learned how to set a handbrake, how to release a handbrake if we wanted to move rail cars, right? And so I think in this case, the engine failing, losing air pressure, and not setting enough handbrakes led to that train sliding down the track as it did.
Yep. So. And we can keep going with this one, but we can also talk about that East Palestine derailment too, which was just shy of 2 years ago. There's actually lessons on both of these that we've learned. Unfortunately, some of the lessons that were learned on that Lac-Mégantic, one, they came out with new regulations. However, that still failed on the East Palestine. Yes. And for people that don't remember, that East Palestine, it was a train operated by Norfolk Southern, actually derailed. It spilled a lot of hazardous materials, including vinyl chloride, which was the worst of it.
Right.
There weren't any lives lost due to the spill, but the incident led to definitely environmental damage, health complaints from the residents, and a large scale evacuation. And that that derailment was attributed to a defective wheel bearing. Again, outdated braking technology, and then the gaps in the hazardous material classifications that exempted that train from stricter safety protocols. So, there's a lot of governmental oversight, but there's gaps in there too.
Yeah. Right. And once again, companies, they they are very good at keeping themselves going, right? So sometimes it is through deferred maintenance, and sometimes it's through finding those loopholes, right? I don't think any company is above it. And I'm not saying companies intentionally go out and go for it, but I think that with East Palestine here, it was definitely, they found a workaround, and it led to less stringent standards that definitely led to this incident happening.
Yep. Absolutely. But I think there was some technological shortcomings in both scenarios that have been brought to attention and have been started being addressed a little more prevalently out there. One of those is the outdated technology that played critical roles in both disasters, such as the DOT 111 tank cars, which have since been phased out in Canada and the U.S. both. East Palestine highlighted the risks of relying on conventional brakes instead of electronic controlled or ECP brakes, as well as the failure of a hot box detector to trigger that in a timely action. So for those that are out there that don't know, those actually have sensors that will give a pre-warning when the bearings and brakes are getting hotter than they're supposed to. And it should, in time, allow the conductors and the engineers to fix that problem before it comes a major derailment like this happened. Yeah,
because I think with the East Palestine one, they got a warning about a hot bearing, almost imminently before the derailment. So there's almost no time to react for it.
Yeah.
So unfortunate for sure.
And then some other takeaways, though, emergency preparedness. Both cases, local communities were ill-prepared for the scale of that disaster. First responders were overwhelmed by the fire and explosions in the Canada incident.
Oh, yeah.
While in East Palestine, they lacked the training and resources to handle such a hazardous material event very effectively.
Right, yeah.
And the effectiveness was actually called into question multiple times while this was ongoing. They had some big decisions to make in that instance of how they were going to handle the runaway on that. And I think it was kind of a polarizing decision from all angles.
Agreed, yeah. Right. And it was a bad scene because really, I feel badly for the local fire departments in both of these. Because how do you prepare for something like, like with the Canadian one, how many rail cars went up? I mean, the scale of that disaster how can one department prepare for such a mass disaster like that, right? It's almost like a regional response effort. And
absolutely.
With East Palestine, same kind of thing. It has to be a regional response to expect the East Palestine Fire Department to come on in and save the day. That is incomprehensible. Because the type of damage that they were dealing with, the fires, the hazardous chemicals, there's a lot to take in. It's a very complex moving thing. And it forced their hand, to take the action they took, which was, instead of dancing around it, doing that flare-off operation, right, with vinyl chloride. So I think that was the biggest decision they had to make, right, was the rail company brought in a contractor to do the flare-off because they didn't want those cars of vinyl chloride to explode instead. So,
and in looking back at it, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
But for those that were on the scene, they saw the pressure relief device going on one car and they weighed the hazards there and they believed the most imminent danger was for that to blow and cause a chain reaction. And who knows what we would have been dealing with at that point.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
It would have been way worse because who knows, right, with that explosive concussive force, what other damage it would have wreaked. So, and I get it, right? So it's tough to say, okay, we're going to flare it. And they flared it. And that had consequences too, right? Because vinyl chloride itself is dangerous, from a chemistry standpoint. It's one of those things where I hear the name and I instantly think this thing can polymerize. If it's a runaway reaction, it's going to lead to very, very bad things. And, the question is, how is it stabilized? How much stabilizer is in there? Is the stabilizer thermally liable? Will it break down with high heat? And, even if it doesn't, let's say by the grace of God, it's fine under high heat. I know that when vinyl chloride gets burned, one of the side products it can form is phosgene, which we talked about that multiple episodes ago, right? We talked about chemical warfare agents. Phosgene is a chemical warfare agent. And I'm not saying it's a 1-to-1, one burn molecule of vinyl chloride makes one phosgene. It's not that way at all. But it's still a component of the smoke that's produced.
Yeah, it's still some nasty, nasty stuff all the way around.
For sure. But I can honestly say I don't know if I would have done it differently. So I can't say I would have tried to, put out or reduce the thermal loading on that tank car and hope that it stopped off gassing. I think that what they did was a good proactive response. But, it's going to sound weird, but I tell this to my kids all the time. Every decision has a consequence, and not all consequences are great. So even a good decision can have bad consequences.
Absolutely.
And so I think this was one of those things where no matter what, they were going to lose, but which is the smaller loss? And I think what they did was right in flaring it off, even though it had the negative consequence of, production of phosgene and other side chemicals from burning the vinyl chloride. Because they prevented the explosions, and it would have been a chain reaction. There's no way one would have gone without taking the rest of those cars with it.
No, I agree with that completely. So that does bring up, the environmental contamination. It was significant in both Canadian and East Palestine. Rivers and the Canadian one, it suffered extensive pollution, while, East Palestine, the residents faced soil, water, air.
Yeah.
That led to a lot of health complaints, nausea, vomiting, headaches.
Yeah.
Respiratory issues.
Yeah.
So.
Right. And I mean, it's both ways are bad, but I mean, trying to think about if you were a facility that uses vinyl chloride, any chemical for that instance, how do you try and plan for mitigating environmental releases from a rail car, right? That's a tough thing to do, let alone on a stretch of rail line, not in an industrial facility, not in an incorporated city, just, wherever, BFE, right? That's tough. Yeah. So you got to cart in all your gear to do this. There's no way that it's going to be like a perfect win.
No, I agree.
So it's tough, and I agree with you. Like when I was reading about the Canadian disaster, my next thought was like, what's the worst oil disaster I can think of? Which was like the Exxon Valdez, and man, that took forever to clean up.
Were you around for that, Randy?
Yeah, I'm old as ass. So all the chemicals keep me looking young, man.
I tend to think of the BP oil spill, but okay.
Yeah. So, but it's one of those things where, as any industrial facility or emergency responder, how do you plan for something that's like on a scale of disaster, like multitudes larger than what you typically work with or work on or plan for? It's tough.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's got to go back to almost doing regional training and planning.
Absolutely. And you've talked about the length of cleanup it took for that oil spill. The East Palestine one, to my knowledge, isn't fully recovered as far as an environmental impact to this day.
This was almost 2 years ago.
Yeah. They're still working on it. And, I can honestly say I'm sure there's a segment of the population which, no matter how much cleaning they do, they will never feel okay being there, right? They're always going to be worried about the effects. So
it's that Chernobyl effect.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Yep.
The fact that even though government agencies might say it's clean, you always feel it's dirty. So
how can you really trust the government?
It's I don't know, man. They're only as good as the detector they carry. When was it calibrated? Who did it? I'm just saying. And then
the most dangerous words were, "I'm from the government. I'm here to help."
Trust me, that's what you pay me for every week.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think that maybe could be a good takeaway for people thinking about this rail car disaster, or even who work with rail cars, is, like I said, I know for our site we have a decent amount of rail cars, right? No, at any given time, I would say no less than 50 on site.
All right.
One of the things that we do very well is we train. We try to train. And not only have we taken classes on rail car, like how to move rail cars, how to, the anatomy of a rail car, of the engine controls, but we also do training with our regional partners, right? We're an industrial facility, which, yeah, I know, it puts us in a slightly different class, but we work with our municipal partners. We work with our regional hazmat team and work with our local hazmat teams.
Absolutely.
That way they're familiar with who we are and who they are, and we know what our capabilities are. And we have a very good relationship, which I think is key, especially if you're working with large bulk commodities, that come in by rail car or semi, right? Because if a disaster happens, you're going to need all the friends you can find and in short order.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and help from those outside municipal departments in our instance also kind of alleviates one of the problems that came up in the Palestine incident, where evacuation and communication wasn't exactly communicated thoroughly to the general public.
No, it wasn't.
Right. And so, it's a lack of clear communication, which is also a problem, right? It's not like anyone's immune to that. How it's done, who's doing it, is the message understood, how well is it received? Yeah, I mean, that's all crucial things to recall, and I agree with you 100%, Steve. So, but once again, I think it's repetitions, but how many times do you get repetitions of something so grotesquely large and important as this?
You hope never.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I hope never. So, but yeah.
But I think it needs to bring attention to the dangers of transporting these volatile materials.
Agreed.
It's like you said, Randy. We do it with several of our partners. I think other areas need to do that. Do other industrial facilities do this?
Right.
Let us know. Let us know what you guys do.
Right.
If you don't, how do you prepare for these?
Right. Yeah. How do you interface it? Hopefully, it's not just a single person who's like a liaison. Because from our perspective, we invite those other local agencies on our site to train with our folks. Right. So that way they're familiar with faces. We build those connections. We're better partners. But yeah, how are other places doing it? Right. Maybe we're the lone person doing it that way. Maybe there's some better way of doing it. I don't know.
I would certainly hope not. I hope everyone's out there talking with their local rail communities.
Yeah. Yeah, because we've had rail safety folks in to teach us classes. We've had our regional hazmat team in to train with us. We've had municipal hazmat teams that come in and train with us. We try to be holistic about our partnerships. We want everyone to come work with us because the thought process is, they bring a different ingredient to that soup, and we want all the flavors we can get.
Absolutely.
Because our partners may have more experience than we do in some aspect that we just don't typically see. And I'd be glad to have their helping hand on something that we're not familiar with. It's like a rail car incident, Well, I think we're great. They might be better at some aspect of it.
Or they might think outside the box, and we've missed it the whole time too. So
right, yeah. Especially when it comes to something as important as taking care of those environmental aspects, right? So maybe they got some sweeter way of containing the issue or dealing with it or mitigating. But so I think those partnerships are incredibly important. I'm glad we do it, but I think it's a great takeaway for other industrial facilities to think about. Are they big enough to truly handle the disaster on their own? And then if they think they are, okay, let's scale it up, like an East Palestine style disaster. Can you handle that? Because for us, oh my God, nope.
No, oh my gosh, no. Not at all.
Yeah, absolutely not. So that's where I think it's important to work with partners, especially if you're a standalone department. Don't isolate yourself, man. Always reach out and talk and plan and work. And, if you're shy about working with other regional, reach out to other industrial facilities, for goodness sakes. You can reach out to us and talk to us about how we do things too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's one of those things where it's high time that, I think there's a great relationship between municipal departments that they talk and work well together. I don't think industrial does such a great thing. They don't typically talk and work together. I think that maybe this show should be a bridgestone to bringing industrial teams together to talk and think and collaborate more effectively together.
Absolutely.
Because we don't need to be giving away trade secrets. Saving lives is not a trade secret. I don't care what widgets you make. I don't care how you do it. Let's talk about how to do it safely. Keep your people going home the same way they came in to work it.
You know what? Even if that is a trade secret, come after me for sharing it.
Right.
Yep.
Right. You can complain when your buddy's walking out of the plant or the facility or the vehicle or whatever it might be. So no umbrage there.
So Steve, we were just talking about these two incidences. What are some of the broader takeaways that we can take away from this?
Well, I would say that having more proactive safety measures is a key component. Trying to make prevention more cost-effective and ethical than reactive responses to those incidences is pretty key.
I don't know how to not be reactive. That's what I've had ingrained and, just pushed into my brain.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to be reactive, but falling back on solely being reactive and not proactive is a completely different scenario.
Right.
Agreed.
It's not great to be playing catch up all the time.
No. Additionally, like we talked about, collaboration among stakeholders. So between the rail companies, the regulators, local authorities, and communities, and municipal departments, as well as industrial departments in our cases, we all have to work together to implement safety measures properly and communicate those thoroughly to each other as they come out, so that we're not the 1980s technology coming into the 2030s.
Yeah.
I'm not going to comment on that one either.
But it still works, though. There's no budget for new stuff.
I can see it. That's red on that black and white monitor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think.
And then another one of probably the biggest one is a long-term commitment between regulatory reforms, technological upgrades, and community resilience programs. Require sustained effort both from all those rail companies as well as the other parties involved. It's a big community effort.
Agreed. Yep. Funding and participation. It's got to be a continuous thing or else it falls apart.
Absolutely. And there are a bunch of new programs out there that help with that, but it's on us to be willing to go to them and participate in them, learn.
They're willing to give it to you. You just have to go ask for it.
Yep.
Perfect.
So share your thoughts, experiences, requests for future episodes. How do they get in contact with us, Randy?
Well, they can go hazmatharder@gmail.com. That's a great way to get a hold of us. Or if you're watching any of our videos out there on YouTube, drop a comment on the YouTube video. Let us know what your thoughts are on the episode or maybe what you'd like to see in the next episode.
Absolutely. We're always looking for that input.
Absolutely.
Right. Steve, any thoughts about what we're going to do for next episode?
Well, I think it's Code Red time. And no, I'm not talking about the drink this time.
All right. Well, then I guess our listeners are going to have to wait a week or 2 weeks to find out what that might be. So until next time, everybody, have a good day and hazmat harder.
See you next time. Hazmat harder.